What if the world you knew wasn't as it was? What if all the people, the names, the faces, the emotions, were not real? What if your idols were just blueprints? Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to The Right Opinion, the home of a twat with too much free time. And something told me this had to be done. Today we talk about Storytime Animators. And it came from an interesting source. You see, I have good fellows whose content I support, and so I'll go and drop it a view and send them some constructive feedback. The video I decided to check out on the 17th of August 2018 was Turkey Tom's video on animators. It was a fine enough video. There was definitely insight and information revealed, and I'll leave it in the description below if you want to go and see it for yourself. However, there was one comment that specifically caught my attention, and it's a passing one really.
Awkward personalities. Honestly, this is a good criticism. All of these channels seem to have the same awkward, look at me, I'm an introvert personality on their channels. And as much as they can claim to be introverted, it seems kind of disingenuous when a lot of them like to yell on their videos and scream about how introverted they are.
Yes, an aside comment about the personas adopted by Storytime Animators, admittedly a genre that I don't have that much interest in, gave me a simple lightbulb moment. What is that lightbulb moment? Well, you'll have to be patient because right now we're going to provide a little synopsis of what the animation community is, because I'm sure many of you may be unfamiliar with this swelling group of creators. To understand the evolution, we need to go back a few years, because there was a time when animation was all over YouTube. It was inescapable. A range of unique creators converging in this place that supported their individuality. YouTube was almost custom made for it. The idea that people were expressing themselves. That's what YouTube was all about, and their effort was being rewarded in one of the most fulfilling ways possible. In the early days, animators focused mainly on a distinct style to find themselves. In a video reflecting on this, Quentin Reviews depicted the intricate style that each of them took. I won't repeat what he said, but in the early days of YouTube, there were many creators who really set themselves apart using information. And you know what? I liked it a lot. Even though it wasn't as direct and to the point as many other videos, you could see what was being expressed through the cartoons. Personally, I'm a big fan of show not tell storytelling, and even if the stuff seems shallow on the surface, when you broke a lot of it down, it seemed to reveal interesting layers, and that stuff really rocked the boat of YouTube. But then, it just stopped. I'm sure many of you will know the story, but to those who don't, YouTube run a range of algorithms that decide whether a genre lives or dies, and whether they decide it wasn't profitable enough or just the views began to dip a tad, YouTube decided to pull the plug, and these animators were left in the dark. Many moons passed and the sun seemed set on those in the animation genre. No gaps really opened up. YouTube felt like a different place than therefore was documented by many. However, by 2016 there was a new gap in the market. 2016 was an interesting year, not just for YouTube but for people. We were moving into a more volatile area. There was an air of cynicism. But one thing I'd say in particular was that people were becoming more aware of the world around them, aware of the tactics being used by people who were previously trusted. People no longer sought after those who pandered to their sympathies. It was a real shift in mentality across the spectrum, and that awareness of the world around them led to an equally increased awareness of self. It led to a more brooding generation, a set of people looking more inside themselves rather than looking for exterior validation from the previous set of superficial creators, and through this rose a very interesting genre known as Storytime animation. Most people here will probably know the odd ones out, who was one of the real pioneers of the genre. At the turn of 2016, he had little more than 10,000 subscribers, yet by the end, he had over 2 million. Why though? Well, his content reflected the landscape that I just described to you. When looking inside themselves, people found insecurities, things that they wanted to change, and no longer did they look to these fake, smiley vloggers just gloss over it and show the nice, bright side of everything. They wanted people who would put in that sort of self-reflection into their content. Now, it's not like the vloggers and other content didn't try to put deep moments in their videos, but it was almost always given a contrived gloss, or stuck at the end of a video in which they went out and bought a new Bentley for their second cousin. It was hard to relate to struggles, that's what I'm saying, particularly when they were presented in a way that we didn't see them inside ourselves. However, by reflecting on the past, the old ones out tapped into an authenticity. Whereas the former class of vloggers took general struggles and made them personalized, the old ones out reversed that formula and took the humdrum of everyday life and presented them in a light that made people think, this guy gets me. He took his own individual situations and tinted them in a timeless sentiment that appealed to the current generation of our introspective youth. I respect him for that. As I've said before, I went to VidCon 2018 this year. It gave me lots of individual epiphanies, moments that just stuck out in my head. One of those was the moment when I was passing through the merch stands, and I remember feeling kind of weird when I saw the merchandising for Jaden Animations and the Odd Ones Out. Just a discomfort. My logic soon kicked in, overriding this gut instinct. At the end of the day, anyone who has that following should be completely allowed to sell merch. After all, their fans want to support it too. But it did make me wonder, when something like their content that seems so wholesome and grassroots in their appeal, that speaks to people sometimes in their most vulnerable, could be taken advantage of and transformed into a cash cow, how long is it until the wrong sort of people try to jump on the bandwagon? And that brings us back to our quote. Today we will discuss a plethora of questions, why the animation community is unique in a way, but at the same time how that could both damage their reputation and make them susceptible to criticism, the problems with their often dismissive and passive-aggressive responses to their critics, and how that for many viewers foreshadows a worrisome trend noticed in many YouTube genres before it, and perhaps leading them to the same fate. So without further ado, I suggest we cut into this spicy piece. Let's get to it. Lack of authenticity has been a problem endemic to YouTube. What is remotely different about this situation? Well, let's explain that. You see, content creators like vloggers may have been disingenuous. In fact, fuck it, of course they were disingenuous, but they seldom sold it as anything else. Everyone knew that it wasn't exactly them, and when they did it, it wasn't the crux of their channel, it wasn't the core appeal. It was just an outlet of their forever dramatizing forced personality, which I've laid into multiple times at this point. However, with these Storytime animators, it is them, this is who they are, and these struggles influence their character and the interaction they have with their followers. And that's important, it's not something you should take advantage of. Equally, it means that in the genre, they set the bar incredibly high for conduct. They can't behave like Joey Salads because they present themselves as better, and you can tell that they believe it. So why are we still talking about the way they respond to criticism? And why does it matter? When documenting the original set of animators, Quinton Reviews really showed how each of these individuals had their own personality, channeled through their art, and the beauty that it really created. And so when the clip that we observed in the Turkey Tom video was played, it sent up some red flags. How can you summarize a premise of a genre in one sentence? On top of that, the whole sentiment of his video, whether proven or not, was that there were creators out there who had real trouble taking criticism. Now obviously it depends on how that criticism is delivered. You're not going to engage in someone who's rude or attempts to snidely undermine you. However, given the behavior of some of these animators, when someone makes fairly passable comments and you react with great volatility, then it could be a sign of insecurity. I know commentators who are very aware that their current content they're creating is subpar for their ability. It is written all over their attitude, and I've read it. Now, insecurity isn't always a sign of malintent. Someone may just be socially anxious. However, it is definitely cause for further investigation, and so that's what we're going to be doing today. It's also important to note that another YouTuber, Daft Pinya, has done multiple videos covering the individual YouTubers, and I would definitely recommend checking out some of his videos. However, today we may use certain individual YouTubers as exemplars, but the greater point will be made discussing the culture that surrounds the genre, and why surface value innocence is lined with a sharp poison. For Storytime Animators, people wanted to move away from the inauthentic superficiality, so we looked for people to fill in the void of these new characters that we assessed as deeper. But if the trials and tribulations of these individuals are being summed up so succinctly, then we might have a new problem on our hands. But at least let's try to break the formula down into a few more sentences, and work out where the leverage is being operated. Now you must understand that due to my status as a prominent cynic that I went into these videos expecting to detest most to all of them. Nonetheless, I watched the odd ones out and came to the realization that his content was actually pretty great. Not anything necessarily that I would watch, just not really my style, but he was a pretty compelling creator. Sometimes the pioneer of a genre is retrospectively seen as actually a pretty average creator who just struck gold with the topics. Think Trigger, TRO, Leafy and so on. Not saying they're bad exactly, but it's clear that there were better creators who knew how to utilize their topics with more panache. However, James here clearly actually has raw talent that extends beyond the base formula, and so I was pleasantly surprised. His story said more about himself than he needed to say explicitly. Show, not tell. He's mastered it, so props to him for doing that. However, I did not expect him to be the target of this video because he was doing it before it was popular, and that's something that no uninspired leech would ever do. So from the odd ones out, it inevitably seemed like it was going to go downhill. It wasn't necessarily a sharp drop in quality though, there were just certain cracks that became noticeable, that sent off signals that didn't endear me as a viewer. Alongside watching their content, I watched Dark Pinya's videos about the creators, not just as a monitor to make sure I didn't miss anything, but also to see how they had responded. That can be equally as revealing as the content itself. But let's talk about the appeal of the content. I've spoken about this earlier, but a word I'm using a lot is authenticity. I think it's safe to say that it is one of the key hooks of the Storytime Animator. These people are living life, therefore there are two components that are central to these characters: honesty and entertainment. If either of these were compromised, the fans would be unlikely to support the creator. What I like about the odd ones out is that he manages to make the mundane details interesting, and this is why, in my opinion, he'll always be the most successful. This is not to say that no other individuals in this genre have the capability to be interesting, actually completely the opposite. However, their personalities in particular, and sometimes their humour, seem to lack a pizzazz. In fact, if you just strip them down to the core personality, many of them wouldn't be interesting at all. So how do you circumvent that? What I found for many of these creators who may not be so recognizable on the personality area was that they often use dramatized source material. Dramatized source material isn't a bad thing necessarily, though it gives the actual storyteller less work, coasting on the crazy plots and clickbait titles. Why is that? Well, you can't be boring while presenting it as entertaining, because at that point it just becomes entertaining, but you can be dishonest while presenting it as honest. You can't really answer the question of whether these things happened or not, nor can you pick out specific events. But eventually, with the clickbait and the sort of embellishment that I observed, I began to feel like some of the videos were just Tana Mongoose on paper, just with a bit more personality, which is obviously welcome, but it's not impossible to tell stories, so I don't really rate that alone. Once again, you can't prove it as fake, but it's understandable to be skeptical of the idea that all of these people with such a backlog of interesting stories remembered so well in their memory, down to specific details, have all converged in one community. Hella fucking coincidence. And in fact, if you don't want me to spell it out to you, Terry TV will. Another YouTuber reached out to me saying he made a video on him that hadn't even accumulated 100 views when good old Terry went on his little diatribe. For the record, Terry TV is a trend hopper creator who recently decided to jack Storytime Animation and used the fact that he had mentioned that his series were exaggerated as a defense for exaggerating. Fair point, of course, until you dig further and realize that he only announced it was exaggerated in the last 2 minutes of the final video of the series, after an unofficial outro.
I know a lot of you guys have been asking in the comments if these stories are true. The answer is yes, to an extent. They are based off of my life, but as some of you guessed in the comments, yes, some things that happened in the story were exaggerated a little bit just for comedic effect or just to make the story a little more interesting.
And after he'd accumulated over 2 million views. Kinda like me conducting a series of pranks and then declaring them fake in my final video after reaping the sweet ad revenue. He said he wanted to address the claims, but I wonder why he didn't address them at the end of the second video at least. In fact, Terry TV seems quite sure that he made it so obvious that it was exaggerated, which does make me wonder why he even cares about someone calling him out for it. It's Hollywood, guys. Storytime Animators are Hollywood. Put that quote on a wall, lads. I'm sure that's exactly what people like the odd ones out want to hear. Now make no mistake, Terry TV is a trend hopper, and his movement to animation is the perfect embodiment of what we're going to be talking about today. In a recent video, Dark Pinya very briefly showed that somehow a YouTuber had managed to expose himself as faking his stories, as this guy who had two accounts, Fox Goodman and Matt Spicer, had released two videos on the same subject, both telling different stories. The fact that in a discrete environment someone has nonetheless managed to show themselves as falsifying stories should say how easy it actually is. The problem is beyond the concept and combination of animation, the content exists on a spectrum. It's easy to see the difference between the best and worst creators. This is fine. In fact, clickbaiting, telling exaggerated stories, having lower quality animations, even being emotionally manipulative in certain scenarios is not unreasonable. If you are fairly lazy with your animations and it attains views, then more power to you. The point is that no genre is truly above criticism. You do not have the sole ability to be better by any excuse. But the problem is that they seem to adopt this holier-than-thou attitude when responding to criticism, because there are people who will take problems with all of the things that I've just listed, and that's the simple fact of the moral compass. Some people view things as acceptable, other people don't. What matters to the viewer is consistency. One of the points that I saw made from time to time was that because animation videos as a basis take more effort than per se Fortnite videos, thanks James, that you cannot call animation lazy because there are other genres of video that take less effort at their best than animation at their worst. Though James, my friend, that is just subjective commentary. Individuals are compared to others within their own genre, because that's where the appeal lies. However, under the precipice of content superiority, this bizarre standard has been adopted. Let me ask you this, is Beethoven's Fifth better than Lose Yourself because it took longer or more effort? Does it not warrant criticism? No, because an unbelievably high amount of effort is assumed in the premise of the former. It does not push the genre of orchestral symphonies above criticism. You can defend a genre from criticism on its own. You can defend an individual creator from criticism on its own. But to use a genre to create an umbrella defense for all its animators is a fallacy of division, assuming all components are good because the greater product is good. This partly explains why, until the last month, Storytime Animators seldom received the same level of scrutiny as other communities. But there's also more to say about that. With Storytime Animators, everything is drenched in a level of emotional depth that makes it hard to criticize. Everyone seems more wholesome. If you criticize them, you're criticizing a character that has developed more intricate relationships with the audiences, and you do feel bad for criticizing that. However, regardless of the level of effort in videos, every creator should be open to some level of criticism, no matter how fantastic their character is. Talking down their content or argumentative points is never off the table.
Here's a real high-class bout. Now go!
In case that hasn't been discussed enough already, some of these creators do not like receiving criticism themselves. In fact, their response in certain instances has been bemusing, whether it was dismissing it as subjective commentary, blocking individuals, or downloading a video so to not give a creator the views. That last one is truly hilarious because of the effort it requires. None of my points previous are trying to show the animators as, quote, bad human beings. However, the self-appointed sanctity that they give themselves is rather unfounded, as undoubtedly many of them participate in the same behaviors that any other non-animation YouTube genre has profited from. If someone chooses to criticize them for that, the fact that it's animation doesn't absolve them. The reason why some of them do have trouble responding to criticism is something known as the good guy complex. The fact that whether these people are good or bad within the community, they have developed such an idea focused around being the protagonist, the criticism against them is seen as unjustified because of their greater morality. This is something we have encountered constantly on numerous occasions, from Greg Poole to FouseyTube, the idea that there is a greater good that justifies the little mishaps. Although their attitude is harder to point out as they don't explicitly say it. Often it's just little side references where you know you've gotten under their skin.
But of course, this isn't a perfect world, and people of the internet age like to ignore anything reasonable other people have to say in order to push on their own stubborn opinions and belief onto other people.
I was a kid once, as I mentioned before, who blindly hated on YouTubers just because I heard from the commentary channels that I watched they were bad people.
Whose approval is necessary? Daft, the Virgin Mary? So-called experts examine their subjective commentary.
Most of these demonstrate animators setting up straw men of how their criticism is delivered, and then telling their fans that these ridiculous ideas are not worth engaging with, while implying some generality in the idea of these critics. Probably one of the best examples of this was when Something Else YT made a video titled rip-offs, in which he decided to define rip-offs
What is a ripoff? Well, it's a fraud or inferior imitation, basically.
before explaining why he couldn't be his own definition of rip-off.
To me, it seems like people forgot the differences between taking inspiration and just blatantly copy and pasting.
Which, yes, he's not directly copying or plagiarizing, but I feel those claiming he was a quote rip-off were referring to the second definition in the dictionary. You know, the inferior imitation one. And although you may be past that stage, I understand what people were saying. He then goes on to say that no one owns a style, and although true in this situation, it doesn't really contradict the idea of rip-offs existing. No one was trying to sue you, mates. He then follows this by saying that because Let's Play YouTubers regularly play the same game and have the same style of editing, and are not considered rip-offs, he can't be considered a rip-off either. So let me rephrase this logical fallacy for everyone to understand how ridiculous it is. Because one artist draws with a pencil and another artist draws with a pencil and neither are ripping off each other, then if one artist's style resembles the other, then that cannot be a rip-off either. Sounds a bit silly now, doesn't it? On top of that, he said, in fact, it's all fine because he has a different personality.
Personalities. A creator's personality is what makes a channel unique.
Suddenly to this creator, design seems much less a factor, but he seems more offended at the idea that people were judging him above all. However, the tone of the specific video is what caught my attention.
You're not blind commenter. I am here to educate you on the art of not being a dumb.
One of enlightenment. There are a lot of stupid people in this world, and something else YT here is going to sit you all down and provide you with an education free of charge. How kind. He is an animator, and because he is an animator, and he doesn't directly copy, then to call him a rip-off is the most audacious thing you could do. What I'm trying to say is that many of these creators almost seem offended at the idea that they could be perceived as anything else than what they want their audience to see them as, even when it's trivial things like rip-offs. Some may argue that there is no credible argument against such things like clickbait or faking and exaggerating stories and even ripping off when it's commonplace on YouTube. Let me tell you, I've come across a few right opinion clones in my time. Although not an unreasonable argument, I think the fact that Storytime YouTubers base their appeal and build relationships and subsequently profit off the trust and authenticity that their content pervades does mean that if a commentator wants to contradict that, to show up an element that their audience may not have seen before, that may alter their perception, then they equally have a right to do so. And if the animators want to act holier than thou, then they're going to be held to holier than thou standards. They did this to themselves. And judging by the little things, when researching through Daft Pinya's videos, it's clear that a few of them have felt guilty about things they've done. One of the minor, very telling changes was the removal of the featuring Odd Ones Out credit on Tim Tom's video title, which blew him up. After all, putting features when they barely feature is seen by some as marginally objectionable, and given how sometimes they've complained about it, I understand why. However, you cannot deny the past. It still happened, and you still did it that way. If you think that might contradict your image, well, you should have thought about that before. The problem is where there's success, there are always people looking to profit off it without the same heart, without the same intentions as you, the good guy. And even as the good guy, you might make mistakes. It doesn't mean just because you're a good guy that you shouldn't be held to account on them. Almost every community is one that will have good creators and bad creators, good people and bad people. A clip from Tim Tom shows him expressing how everyone in the animation community is just so wonderful.
You see in online communities is a lot of vitriol, a lot of anger, a lot of hatred. And what I've found with the animation community on YouTube is that couldn't be farther from the truth.
But I don't agree with that, though I do understand why he perceives it that way. The problem with the animation community is that the stock persona is inherently good, deep, and likable, and the little exaggerations are very subtle, so it becomes impossible to distinguish between those who are positive givers and helpful people, and those who are sucking out the energy of the community, those who may be participating in disingenuous practices, or those who are taking advantage of the kindness of others. It all becomes indistinguishable, which is rather dangerous for a community, because because as a creator or as a viewer, you no longer know who to truly trust. You either put your faith in everyone, or you play your cards very carefully. Without catering to too many memes, there's this great TED Talk, which discusses the concept of givers and takers. I'll leave it in the pinned comment, though it may be among other links, so you might have to Control F it, type in TED or something. But obviously takers are people who always contribute the least while wanting to take the most, and there are also those who cater into the agreeable and disagreeable factions. The problem is the existence of agreeable takers, those who behave nicely while still taking advantage of others around them. To be successful in the animation community, your persona has to be inherently agreeable, so regardless of if you're a giver, taker, or a matcher, people cannot tell the difference. To suggest that through chance there has been this utopian community created where everyone who tries for success are just fantastic human beings, to me, and probably to many others, would be delusional, and it's only a matter of time until the leeches begin to pile on. And this is where everything comes full circle, because where there is success, there is a formula. This again is the community circle. People want something more original, more organic. However, as soon as people realized the opportunity and as soon as the formula became clearer and used that nature to create personas, that wholesome appeal will be undermined and the flaws will start to show, even for the best. Eventually, it's only a matter of time until people start to point out the flaws, that something's polluted and you can't run away from it. The problem is that publicly, it's very difficult to tell who's real and who's fake, but it won't stop people from trying. And so when responding to this, they have to keep this in mind, that the person who's criticizing them may make some very compelling points. However, in this instance, behind the agreeable facade lies a much more chronic problem. So recently, in spite of the absence of abhorrent scandals, they still have been receiving a significant amount of criticism. Why is that? They do seem to have the belief that they know their community better than me, which is probably true, but I know human nature better than them. You see, I've watched a lot of videos and seen a lot of legitimate criticism leveled against these creators, and I've leveled a lot of criticism which I think is fair, not just current but speculative, but I don't think they'll be acknowledged because of their nature to respond in an interesting manner. We're going to pull back to the Something Else YT video. So I left this final part out of his response to the allegations against him that he was a ripoff because they're most relevant here. Basically, he not only says himself, but he features Jaden Animations, another YouTuber, to say he's not ripping off anyone and they don't mind because they're there to help each other out. So writing mean comments calling people ripoffs is not helpful at all to the community, the greater good. And this is a problem. The Storytime animation community sees themselves as one huge collective, as they all note on multiple occasions stepping on each other's toes would be disastrous for the algorithm, or the algorithm, as some like to brand it. So it only makes sense that they help each other out. On top of this, it means defending each other, which is something that they have done on multiple occasions. They all seem to be in a consensual business friendship with each other. If someone's leeching a bit, then that's alright, because even if they do, it helps everyone out. Using tags for views, sure, go for it. That's all good, but you can't be surprised if someone calls you out for it. And saying that it's all alright because everyone in the specific context was fine with it just won't wash with many people. Why is that? Because it doesn't contradict a greater narrative that may be implied about their character. And that's why the criticism against animation has been slowly growing, because in spite of their half responses, they never work out how to actually contradict the narrative. Sometimes if you consent to something that could be perceived as bad, instead of cancelling the narrative, it actually just extends to you as well, though it depends on the context, of course. This is perfectly embodied in Darth Pinya's content. A lot of his previous videos never gained much traction, because although his greater narrative contradicted the image that the Storytime animation community tried to emulate, he never successfully disproved it. And in some instances, he even received quite severe criticism, such as his video on Jaden Animations, a video which I feel was quite misguided in its points.
Wait, could Jaden be bipolar? I can't prove this, of course, but we'll just put it in the things I think Jaden might be. Moving on.
However, with the recent drama slowly escalating, harsher criticism and more intense videos documenting more universally agreed wrongdoing, such as tracing, neglect of credit to artists, and just complete deflection of criticism on the back of simply awful reasoning, people's minds will slowly be changed, and every single one of his videos on that topic has slowly gained more credibility, and people will begin to doubt the rhetoric espoused by many others in defense of these creators. The reason is because the idea of just permitting it within the community exists beyond an inner circle. People begin to see how, if kept up, this could create disingenuous characters who not just exploit those within their circle, but those outside, artists, fans, and so on. it's probably happened already. People don't like the idea of that. People don't like the thought that they'd be contributing to something like that, even if everyone in that specific scenario is in support of it. If I gave someone permission to stab me and they stabbed me, would it necessarily absolve them? If anyone here has watched Hot Fuzz, I compare the animation community to Sanford, the sort of place that works so hard to keep a lovely image that it requires questionable action sometimes to preserve it, and they can feel the pressure, and the harder they try to defend it, the more I feel they have something to hide, and the more the cracks begin to show. A really interesting example of this was when a YouTuber by the name of Manga Cayman made a response to Turkey Tom. The video was fair in many points, and it also brought up some tweets that Tom had subsequently deleted that would have given more context to his video. They were distasteful comments directed at someone's physical appearance, and I'm glad he removed them and subsequently was made to apologize over them. People shouldn't just run away from these. And although I do have problems with the video, I am almost certain they will be mostly discussed out by other YouTubers at this point, including Tom himself. Point is, his tweets were something that should have been included as a disclaimer given its relevance, and as he hadn't publicly apologized for them, it's credible that it served as an alternative explanation for a server ban, and on top of that, it looked like he was being a dick in a public Discord server. I might have banned him too. However, no, what I found most interesting was the Odd Ones Out's response in the comments section. Wow, I had no idea the stuff on Twitter happened. Thanks for showing us. Really makes me wonder why Tom left it out of his video. I've been binging your videos for a while. I think they're really good. I like that you have actual criticisms and bring up new things to the conversation. Well, James, you're gonna love this next part. I have sung my praises for the man and his content, but this is where it ends for now. James has no love for Tom, and to be honest, if I were in his shoes, I probably wouldn't either. But I don't like these comments. They're what I like to call an empty lead. It's a classic rhetorical tactic used by people when they want to take credibility from their detractors without giving them any way to respond to them. They firstly blow up whatever information or react in an emphatic manner, saying something like, "Wow, amazing," and then imply that something worse must be behind it without explicitly saying what you're thinking. Like, what on earth do you mean? Makes you wonder. Cayman here just spent a whole fucking video explaining it. This is the most that James can really exert influence. Any greater acknowledgement of Turkey Tom would just be publicity for him, but my god does he try hard with everything he has. So I said to Tom in a group chat that it was a fair video on him, but what was with the Odd Ones Out comment? Boy, there was more. The Odd Ones Out had actually approached Tom and given him a whole lecture about the situation and how the tweets, these specific tweets, had ruined his reputation and could follow him forever.
Forever. Forever. Forever. Forever.
No, that's what you want it to do. It only vaguely compromised the points he made about the Discord server. Everything else was presented in videos before anyway. And yes, as a joke, it was poor form, but you're setting the bar pretty low if you believe those sorts of jokes ruin reputations, considering it has been fairly prevalent in many YouTubers, whether funny—
He is literally just fat. A big ball of fat that sells himself by the pound for money. And his streams have only confirmed that all you really need is a nice big pair of...
or unfunny.
Dear fat people. Some people are already really mad at this video. What are you gonna do, fat people? What are you gonna do? What are you gonna chase me? Really? You're gonna chase me? It's gonna be like fucking Frankenstein.
And yes, he was specifically referring to the tweets, see the question. Now, James isn't stupid, and he knows that his mates have derided people's images in the past.
Mr. Chubbs! I literally just named him 2 minutes ago, and he just destroyed it! First impression, already, I hate him!
And that although the targeted nature in this instance definitely makes it worse, it's not career ending. So why on earth would he make such a song and dance about it? Well, to understand that, we have to look at his second comment too. He was considering following Tom, but now he can see that Tom is no one that he should be associating with. That damn disgusting tweet is enough evidence to show that he is in fact a cretin. But if you genuinely believe that, you wouldn't have said that. Simple as. No one says that if it's not on the table in those circumstances. In fact, the follow here is clearly being used to put Tom in a double bind. Either Tom grovels to the follow, admits that they were horrible, and affirms James's implications about the comments and subsequent reputational damages, allowing people to hold it over him and thus tainting his future statements on the animation community, or Tom stands his ground and forfeits the follow. Now, it looks like James has dealt with animators too much. He'd probably roll over at the opportunity to get that follow if they just listen listen to his indirect advice. Tom is not that sort of person. You clearly didn't watch his Keemstar video. And in fact, I spoke with someone briefly afterwards who had the exact same experience. They got unfollowed because they put out a mean tweet towards an animator and then received the follow when they deleted it. It's pretty shady leverage being operated, but above all, it's just rather immature. And immature is something that seems to pop up a lot. After speaking to some people, we kind of agreed that James doesn't necessarily seem like an unpleasant person, just someone who's never had to deal with a negative image being portrayed of him, so is just oblivious of how to respond. Another huge problem is that James and generally the animation community seem to value words more than action, something that is viewed differently, not just in the commentary sphere, but in the general YouTube sphere from what I've seen recently. We like to ask what something can say about their character, rather than just holding items without context. But there is still a more glaring point than this, at heart. The Odd Ones Out has 8 million big fuck off subscribers. Why on earth would he care about a commentator and what he says about some community? Why would it affect him? Why would he want to bind his critics? To respond to my question I just posed, I think this sentence from Something Else's video sums it up quite well.
I mean, as Jaden said, yeah, we all really depend on each other and actually help each other behind the scenes.
Everyone really cares about helping themselves, that's fine, and it is definitely reflected in how they defend each other. However, if they are defending a community that will eventually be infiltrated by bad actors, they will have a lot harder of a job retaining that audience, because when you live as a collective, you die as a collective. They are collectivists, which works great when everyone is winning and getting loads of views. But as the TED Talk revealed, all it takes is one bad taker getting out of hand to fuck it all up. Let's go right back to the start of the video. I spoke about old animation and how it had a sharp downfall. Many of these YouTubers who I've spoken about today are probably those who are most aware of it. Obviously, as an animator, many of them probably grew up amongst people who inspired them but fell foul to the algorithm. A few of the YouTubers within the genre have even alluded to the algorithm. These guys are not stupid and they understand how much of a prominent part it plays in their lives. In case you haven't noticed, they tend to collaborate a lot and they almost certainly talk to each other. They've really created a collectivist community that seeks to benefit them all at once. As YouTubers, they also witness the downfall of people like Leafy and how a brief bump can begin a domino effect that subsequently destroys the channel. And given the fact a lot of animators have created this codependency, if one of them was to fall flat, it could subsequently knock a load of them. So the Odd Ones Out interest and involvement in this topic and those who criticize it suddenly becomes a lot more understandable. And I do empathize with his approach, but it doesn't justify the actions always being taken, nor does it change the fact that there are certain conclusions that can be drawn from this behavior. This is why people do care about the fact that many respond to criticism badly. As I said, there's a watering hole, and where there's a watering hole, there'll be people attempting to poison it. And in fact, I think the collectivist nature definitely poses the question, what happens when something worse happens? Because it will. What happens when someone undesirable gets amongst the pack? What if it's happening already? What if it's already happened and it's just been swept under the rug? How do you deal with that? Because although what we've discussed today mainly centers around qualms, and a fair amount of them which could be considered trivial, their response and subsequent philosophy seems to breed an environment of potential for exploitation. And for all we know, it may have already occurred. I mean, you look at things like MeToo and you see how easy it is to conceal things that seem so unbelievably obvious in hindsight. That's a conceptual comparison, by the way. I'm not suggesting that there are any sexual criminals within that community, though obviously the truth is out there somewhere. Given a lot of the criticism revolves around how these Storytime animators have conducted themselves outside of videos and sometimes even in private, it raises a real question, the dangerous difference between a public and private persona, and people like Darth Pinya are growing and their criticism is considered more validated because people are beginning to realize that these friendly, supposedly more open commentators behind the scenes may not be any more trustworthy than the previous generation that had been purged. And bring it back to the original comment, that's what happens when you have a formula. That's what happens when people realize that all you need is this persona with some deviations maybe. And sure, there are people who definitely stand out from that, but if anyone can make it using that, then the community will be infiltrated. Fox Goodman is not the first, and he is certainly not the last. And as soon as it's been shown that anyone can do that, then the whole concept becomes dubious to audiences. Now once again, people will always act on the notion of innocent until proven guilty, and I think that's the right thing to do. However, However, that protective shield of premise alone just is not there anymore. The animation community is built on the foundations that depend on each other, on intradependency and interdependency. Intradependency because their personas are composed of many components of purity which set such a high bar that any contradiction could cause that image to deteriorate. And interdependency in the fact that they rely on each other to benefit the algorithm. Therefore, they need to equally preserve themselves and each other. And when things happen like this, it foreshadows something, and people are not reacting just to what has happened, which is what the animators seem to wrongly construe. They're reacting to the implications, they're reacting to the character narratives, they're reacting to the possibilities in the future. And although the collective approach may benefit those when it is successful, it will be highly detrimental when the pressure sets in and some creators buckle. Human nature dictates that. Every community will have its due date. You can't stop an image being somewhat stained. You can postpone it, but you cannot prevent it. And by making your content more intertwined, all you do is make it more susceptible when that day finally comes. When you represent each other at your best, you represent each other at your worst. There is a mix of hypocrisy, hubris, and even a touch of hysteria. But we can only look currently from the observation deck. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes? I highly doubt that many of these people I've spoken about today are bad. In fact, very few. When you've spoken to people and when you yourself have suffered at the hands of systems structured no different to the one being established within Storytime Animation, it becomes difficult to defend, especially when wrongdoings are being committed. And many people who likely have experienced that too will wake up to the concept. When you have an accessible community, like any, you have the good and the bad. But the animation community seems set on only showing the good and hiding the bad, which is kind of ironic as people kind of turn to the community to address their own imperfections. And as commentators like the ones we've spoken about today force open the doors, they will show more and more cracks that we previously glossed over, and people's opinions will change. If I were them, would I be concerned? I don't know, maybe they're just paranoid, but I might consider changing my behavior towards those outside the community. Something isn't better just because it takes more effort. To summarize, when your community becomes accessible to less than talented creators, and when an easy formula is in place, then it's only a matter of time before the negative starts to flow in, at which point many audiences will look to you to oust those people. However, with the attitudes adopted by the creators, they seem to have a problem with that. At which point the audience will lose that core faith in the creator and the genre will subsequently perish. And given how you set the standards, you're not going to make it easy for yourselves. A genre itself can never be the good guy, and the animators may be able to outrun the characters in their stories, may be able to outrun the fat kid, but they can't outrun criticism, they can't outrun the algorithm, and they sure as hell can't outrun me, the right opinion. Yep, so anyway, that's the video. I spent so long on this one, far too long actually. It's not been the most fun I've had, but I hope it gives you guys something. I also want to apologize in case the audio is slightly subpar. The audio quality is slightly subpar, that is, because I basically moved country, and the new place that I'm staying at currently has the most atrocious acoustics, so I bought a few things and I made a little makeshift setup on my desk, but I'm not sure it's good enough and I'm not sure how to completely counteract it. I had reached out to my new university to say, do you have any recording studios, but I have to be taking a relevant course to have access to them, so it is what it is, my friends. I also want to give a big thanks to the editors who once again done a fantastic job, probably one of their more challenging pieces, so I'd really appreciate it if you went and checked them out and just sent them some love. And if you can spare the time, many of them are budding creators themselves and they would really appreciate the constructive feedback on their videos, because I believe they all have great potential, or else they wouldn't be editing this video. On top of that, if you want to talk to me, you can reach me on my Twitter at The Right Opinion, Facebook too, though I don't use that as much, and Discord as well, which I am trying to use more. I can't think of anything else to say. I hope everyone is well. I, as always, appreciate the support, the very passionate support. It is why I carry on doing this. I really could have taken a break now. It's the start of the university year and I want to carry on. And I spoke to my parents and they said, James, carry on your YouTube, see what you can do. And so here I am, sat here, recording another one in a fucking mess of a desk / mini recording studio, which is barely workable. But with enough perseverance, it may just pay off. Next week, hopefully, the video will be more polished. That's all I can say. So until then, however, I'm the right opinion, and I'll see you in the next one.